Hi, my name is Arielle Tonkin, and I'm delighted to be sharing a weaving exercise, a weaving activity in connection with Jodi's book for the Jewish Women's Archive with you today. You'll need just a few basic materials commonly found at home, and I'll walk you through the process for the weaving, and I'll also share a little bit about how this Jewish ritual artifact could be part of a bigger process and a bigger project of reinventing Jewish ritual just from the basic actions and activities of art and creative expression of things that we have already happening in our lives. So to start, the basic materials that you'll need for this project are a piece of rectangular cardboard. Any cardboard scrap will do for your loom, for your very simple weaving machine. Mine is just over 8 inches long, and mine is just over 4 inches wide. And you can see mine even has these notches cut out of it. So really any scrap will do. A pencil, any pencil is fine. Some stronger twine or embroidery floss or even dental floss for making your warp thread, the vertical threads upon which we'll weave. And then any scraps of yarn or any strips of paper or any cut up, any tinsel like I have here, any leftover strips from a t-shirt, anything that you want to use for a weaving. This beautiful weaving by Rose Ginsburg, a dear friend of mine, Fiber Master, is all made of paper. So you might even just use strips of paper for yours. Oh, one more thing. This is optional, but it makes it a little bit easier. If you do have a yarn needle at home, which is like a needle that's large enough and thick enough to string a piece of yarn through, that'll make your weaving go faster and it'll allow you to do some fancy embroidery techniques and tricks if you want to, but it's absolutely not necessary. You can just use your fingers. You can also use a crochet hook or a chopstick. So here's my scrap of cardboard, and I've made sure that the corrugation, the holes of the cardboard, are running the long way, so I can sort of closely see the vertical stripes. Those are going to help me measure out my notches. So I've taken my pencil and made a small centimeter long mark with a pencil on each line of corrugation of the cardboard. So the cardboard itself is my ruler, and it shows me where I want each of my indentations to be. And I'm going to use these notches as guides for my warp threads. So I'm marking them off on each end, each of the short ends of the cardboard with pencil. So once you've marked off your notches on the short ends of the cardboard, I'm using a scissor. You could also use an X-Acto blade or a box cutter. You're just going to cut those notches till they're anywhere between 1/4 of an inch and an inch deep. Those notches are going to function to catch the warp threads as we wrap them around. Okay, so the next step is that we're going to warp our loom. I pre-measured, just for the sake of our video, a length of cordage that would fit perfectly, but you can see this is how much thread is going to be required to cover all of the indentations around this cardboard. So you'll take the end of your warping thread, you'll floss it between the teeth that are at the very edge of your cardboard, and I like to anchor it I leave about 1 inch or 2 inches on the end, and then I anchor it by wrapping it around one more time. So I'm really flossing that first tooth. And then I'm gonna actually just wrap around and around and around to warp my loom. So I'm just going from notch to notch, and I'm hitting the parallel notches on either side of my piece of cardboard. And again, for my warping thread, I'm using a stronger piece of twine as opposed to a less strong piece of yarn, because the warp really holds all the tension for our weaving. Okay, great. So just like how we did at the start, I'm anchoring my thread on the last tooth on the opposite corner, and I'm sticking it in, I'm flossing it through that last tooth, and then I'm wrapping it around a few times, and then I'm just gonna cut off the extra and leave a little bit hanging. Okay, that's your warp. So I'm using about maybe 2 or 3 feet of leftover warp thread to start off my weaving. And I'm going to demo this using a yarn needle. You can also use your fingers, and perhaps I'll even demo a few with my fingers as well. So I'm threading my twine through my yarn needle, and the way I weave is I just go under, over, under. And it doesn't matter which part of my loom is the front or the back. So I'm starting by going under, over, under, over, under, over, under, over. And for me, in my case, and this will likely be the same for you, I have to sort of pick up the warp threads as I go. And I like to keep a chopstick handy or even just my pencil handy to help me lift up. And I push my needle through sometimes with a pencil when I'm getting started. It's quite tight at the beginning. And then I'm using this yarn needle to pull the thread all the way through. Great. So then I'm going to get to close to the end. And I'm going to leave, again, just about 2 inches at the end there. I'm going to pull it towards the top. I'm going to leave this bit hanging, and I'm about to come back for my second line of weaving here, but I'm holding on to this thread with my other hand, that way it doesn't yank right out. So this time I'm going under, over, under, over, under, over, under, and over, and I'll guide that through with my finger. And what I like to do at the beginning, so it doesn't get too tight, is I take a spare index finger, for me it's my right hand index finger, and I'm pushing down my index finger right at the edge of the end of my warp threads. That way I can pull this thread nice and snug without yanking these or cinching them. You see how that cinches? And we don't want it to get too cinchy. So instead I use my finger as a guide. So my index finger just pushes down right next to the edge and it acts like a little peg. And I can pull really tight against the peg of my finger without cinching the warp. So now I've got my first 2 threads woven, my first 2 lines of weaving rather. And I'm about to get ready to do my third. And the same process repeats. So eventually I'm going to be combing down, and you can use a hair comb or a brush, or you can just use your nails like I did. And you can see that I'm combing the threads up, and then they're becoming a tighter weave by combing them up. And that's how a weaving is begun. So let's do a few more. I want to demo a couple maybe without the needle, just in case you don't have one of those at home. But I'm going under and over, lifting up and going under and over. So essentially I'm just lifting up every other thread and pushing this twine underneath. And I use my fingernails for this. And you could again use a pencil or a chopstick, whatever would help you get under that and lift it up. And as you can see, I was able to get it all the way through without even using a yarn needle. And again, I'll use my finger, my opposite hand. I'm a lefty, so it's my right finger becomes the peg. And then I just brush it right back in. And there we go. So I like to do, I don't know, a good, depending on how thick your twine or embroidery floss or even dental floss is, you could do 4 or 5 like I just did, or you could even do 10 of these smaller, tighter weavings to start. But it's all, this just sort of locks it in at the edge. So here we go. So now we're adding in some thicker yarn, and this could be the moment where you use a thin strip of paper, a cut up bit of t-shirt, any sort of spare fibers that you have around. And I encourage you to think about the ritual significance of what you're choosing. So where does your fiber come from? You might think about like what store you bought it at or who gave it to you. Or I love to think about, like, for one project I wanted to source linen from Lithuania near the town where one of my grandparents came from, because that imbued the weaving with more ritual significance for me. So that's just one example. Color might also be, color or texture might also have significant symbolism for you, or might just give you delight. So I really loved this gold leftover thread. So that's the one that I'm going to use next to the red now. And exactly the same as what we did with our thinner weave. It's under, over, under, over, under, over. And in terms of the length of the ball of yarn you use, if you know you want to stick with one color for a while, you can use a longer ball of yarn, or you can just cut off a smaller piece for yourself to use. Then you can always add in more thread later. So I tend to do this by just leaving little bits of thread hanging on the edge, and I'll hold on to it while I'm going through my second line. You might have a different way. You might like to tie it on. I prefer to tuck these in with my yarn needle at the end of my project. So that was my first row, and then just like before, I'm going to go through and do under, over, under, over. So it's always the opposite. So this is important to see closely. If I went over on the previous line, I'm going under on the subsequent line. And that's what creates the weave. It's an alternating pattern. And that's maybe one of the most important things to take note of when you're getting started here. So here is my second line of gold thread of yarn. So you can check it out. There it is. And just like before, I'll comb it up, I'll make it snug up. And this is how your weaving begins to build up. So you'll just continue going down. If you enjoy having like some more patterning or other things, you can float shapes in the middle of your weaving, or you can start with one color and go back and forth and leave some blanks. There are tons of more advanced tapestry weaving techniques if that's something that you're into. I won't demo those for the sake of this shorter video, but I will show you how to finish a weaving. This is a tapestry that I've been working on for a few weeks, but now let's switch gears and finish this weaving. So I'm going to cut off my gold thread right here, leaving just a couple of inches, and I'm going to move back to that same twine, my stronger twine that I began with. And I'm gonna lock in this last line of yarn with this thinner, strong thread. Again, same as all the other times, over, under, over, under. And I'm gonna lock in, I don't know, I think I'll do about 5 of these again, just to get that nice tight weave at the end there. And to bring it back to Jewish ritual, I sometimes use these as times to count or to breathe or to think about gratitudes. I encourage you to really let your body settle into the meditative process of the over and the under and the repetitive action, and just really appreciate and luxuriate that your body is doing this. Your hands are doing this. You're not looking at a screen. You're looking at something made of soft materials and beautiful colors, and it's a wonderful thing. So there we go. I'm going to cut this here, and now I'm actually ready to take this weaving off of the card. So you might notice a few things. You might notice that there's a lot of shaggy spare thread sticking out. Ultimately, we will want to tuck those in, and I like to do that on the back of my weaving. So first I'm going to cut my weaving off the loom. And here's how I'll do that. I'm going to the back here, and I'm going to cut just along the middle part of the weaving. So it can be a little scary. There's always that little moment of like, before I cut my weaving. But you got this. I like to gather mine up. And again, I like to use my handy dandy pencil or chopstick, whatever you've got. And I like to lift up all of my warp threads. And it makes it a little bit easier for me to get my scissor in. And here I go. Cut, cut. Great. So now you've got 2 sets of fringe. It's getting a little bit late and the battery on my main camera died. So I'm going to wrap it up just by showing you close up how to finish off your weaving. So we've just cut the threads in the middle, and now we've got these loose here, and we're going to gather them in groups of 2 and then tie them off. So I'm leaving them in their notches, and I'm only gathering the 2 that I'm ready to use. So I'm pulling out these first 2, popping them off, and I'm just going to tie a knot. Gather 2 and tie a knot, just like so. Gather your next 2, and you can pull them out of the teeth of the loom and tie a knot. And you'll repeat this process of just gathering 2 threads and tying them in a knot until you have created fringe in your whole the whole bottom part of your weaving. And if you find that you don't have an even number of threads, you can gather 3 as well. It's not the end of the world. But also, you've just cut your weaving off the loom, and it's a little bit of a moment of grief of like, this cloth stops here. It's the end of the story for this particular length of cloth. And it's powerful to end something and to complete it and to knot it and to let it be its own frame, let it have its own dimensions. It's a powerful declaration to say, Ad kan, until here. Here's where we pause. So there we go. That's the end of the weaving. And we'll repeat this process on the other side. And the last thing I'll show you is for polishing off the weaving. You'll take your yarn needle and you'll locate any loose threads. If you've got some embroidery moments like I do, you might have some loose threads randomly in the middle. You can take your embroidery needle, or even a crochet hook to pull that through. That might even be a better tool. So yeah, you can take your crochet hook. I like to come in through the back with my crochet hook, hook around the thread, and pull it right on through. There we go. So now it's on the back side. I'll use my yarn needle and tuck it in, or I'll even just use my fingers sometimes to tuck in these loose threads. I personally don't mind a messy back of a weaving. And to complete this, I would do the same thing of 2 threads at a time, tying and knotting it off to this side, and then my weaving would be complete. And I think I'm going to use this as a marker in my machzor for Yom Kippur, as a nod to celebrating the many genders and many emanations of strength in my greater Jewish community. I want to have that with me in my machzor. But may you be blessed to utilize this new ritual artifact of your own creation for whatever purpose uplifts your Jewish practice and your spirit. May you really find enjoyment in the process. It's been a joy to spend the evening weaving with you. If you have any follow-up questions, you can reach me at arielle.tonkin@gmail.com. That's arielle.tonkin@gmail.com. And please continue to engage in creative practice with your hands in any ways you can throughout this period. And may you feel empowered to make and remake the ritual practices that set your heart alight and that keep you connected to tradition in ways that feel authentic to you. Thank you so much. Bye.